Hello everyone, this is Darcinovia here. This is my review on Labyrinth of Evil, one of the last books before Revenge of the Sith, chronologically, though there are a few others. Comics and books like Order 66. But other than that, this is pretty much one of the last stories before Revenge of the Sith. And as usual, James Luceno does a great job of delivering a good story, plus connecting all previous sources of canon, into this book, so it's seamless. In fact, I argue that this book, at least towards the end, is seamless to the start of the Revenge of the Sith novelization, though I'll get into that later when I actually review the Revenge of the Sith novelization in the future. Now, Labyrinth of Evil is a great book. I think on its own, I think it's amazing. It's not without its problems, though, in continuity. And this is the first, occurrence when I reviewed a Star Wars novel where it's hard for me to defend a contradiction. And I'll get into more detail with that later in the review. But how well does Labyrinth of Evil, tell its story? How well does it lead up to Revenge of the Sith? How does it serve as a prequel? Do you need to read the other material before reading this? The answer is no. Despite the fact that, there's a good amount of stories that took place prior to this, and there's references to characters in the comics like Quinlan Voss, this book can be read completely on its own, independently. And as usual, James Luceno does a masterful job of telling a great story on its own and keeping continuity with everything that came before it. Labyrinth of Evil was definitely an event at the time. I wish I would have read this novel when it came out. Unlike the new canon now, which I'm going to bring it up, where it was a requirement to read the prequel-related stuff, like Rogue One's prequel or the Rise of Skywalker's prequel, stuff that's really necessary to read in order to have an understanding of what's going on and who these characters are. Labyrinth of Evil doesn't feel like a necessity. It feels like something that you want to read if you want to know more of the events that led to Revenge of the Sith. And that's, I think, where Labyrinth of Evil shines brightly. Is it doesn't feel like one of those books that's a requirement to read if you want to understand Revenge of the Sith. The Revenge of the Sith novelization could actually be read as well without reading Labyrinth of Evil. Labyrinth of Evil does what the expanded universe should be doing, expanding the world around it. It makes the universe feel bigger, and correct me if I'm wrong on this. This also gives us a glimpse of General Grievous's backstory. I don't know if this is the first source that does it, but Labyrinth of Evil does do that. And Labyrinth of Evil, I think, does an amazing job of foreshadowing events that will happen in the movie, Revenge of the Sith. Even though it's obvious for those who, watched the original trilogy, I think it did an amazing job of, showing a brief glimpse of Palpatine as Darth Sidious, and towards the end. And even though it doesn't line up well with the micro series, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, at least especially towards the end of the novel, I still think it tells a great story. And I really do enjoy this story, Labyrinth of Evil. I think it's an amazing prequel. And if I have to be honest, of all the prequel novels, that led to the movies, like, Cloak of Deception, Shadowhunter, which lead into Episode 1, which I reviewed those, one of the first novels I reviewed. The Approaching Storm, which was boring as shit. This, in my opinion, I think is the best of the prequel-related novels that lead up to their respective movies. Because, okay, Cloak of Deception and Shadowhunter, those came out after Episode 1. So, those were released to give more context on the events of the movie. The Approaching Storm, I felt like didn't really do much to link that novel to episode 2. Sure, the events of it may have been referenced in the novelization, and maybe to some extent the movie, but completely skippable and it's boring. Not to knock on the other novels that James Luceno did, and Michael Reeves, who did those 2 novels that led up into episode 1. I thought this was the best of the bunch because it was released right before Revenge of the Sith, so those at the time who were waiting for the movie had something to look forward to. It wasn't a requirement to read this like it is for Rise of Skywalker and Rogue One, but it was an extra story to digest as you're waiting for Revenge of the Sith. And I'm speaking what I believe someone would be thinking at the time. And another reason I think this is the best of the bunch, because it feels like it's one of those stories that make you excited to watch Revenge of the Sith or read the novelization, that you're eager, that you want to, read it immediately. It's taking me a lot of willpower to hold back on reading the Revenge of the Sith novelization because I still have another book I have to review first, Order 66. And I think this novel does an amazing job of making you want to read the next book because James Luceno, I think, is a great writer. Now, the problems with this book, I think the weaknesses, is mostly from the continuity perspective, and it was never truly resolved. I know a friend of mine did give me a suggestion that mostly take the micro series as what happened during the Battle of Coruscant, and the events where Anakin and Obi-Wan, what they were doing, during the micro series actually takes place sometime before the events of Labyrinth of Evil. They never had an official explanation. I do think it's one of those times where I do think that I wish Granitoski and James Luceno would have communicated better because you have 2 different depictions of the Battle of Coruscant and they don't line up. Like Mace Windu fighting General Grievous doesn't make any sense because Legends let General Grievous would want to fight Mace Windu and collect his lightsaber, not run away from him or make a fool of him. And it makes no sense how Mace Windu can't fight General Grievous and win, despite him being a vastly inferior opponent than Darth Sidious. It just doesn't make any sense. I think if the Battle of Coruscant was mostly told through the perspective of characters that weren't in the micro series or weren't shown very much, it would have been better. Now, this isn't a knock on the novel. This is one of the occasions where I think it's up for interpretation which event you want to actually take as canon if you are following the EU. I like to take parts of both, but for me, the only thing that's 100% sure from the micro series that happened is the injury with General Grievous got when Mace Windu crushed his chest with his, force powers. Now, but Labyrinth of Evil, despite the continuity hiccups, is still a great book. It's still a great read. And to solve the problem, I say choose which version you prefer more as the depiction of the Battle of Coruscant and go from there. Because both of them don't really line up together, and they never really found an official solution. And it's one of the few occasions where there's an EU contradiction that was never fully resolved. And with TCW as part of the EU, and since the micro series is thrown out when it comes to canon, it makes even less sense, at least to some degree, because how did General Grievous, why is he, oh god, I'm not going to talk about TCW in this video, this is supposed to be something positive. Labyrinth of Evil on its own is a great story, despite some of the continuity hiccups with the micro series. If you can completely ignore it, it's a masterful work that James Luceno always delivers on. I consider him the token of the Star Wars, universe when it comes to linking continuity together and telling amazing stories. Labyrinth of Evil, I give it a classic rating. I think it's a good novel. I think anyone who is a fan of the expanded universe, or you're looking for a place to start, I think this would be a good one place that you could start with. Oh, and did you know this was a first in a trilogy? I did not know that at first, and it doesn't feel like a trilogy, and that's what makes it so good. This is Darcenovia over and out. See you next time with the second to last novel that Karen Travis wrote, for the series, Order 66. Peace out, and may the Force be with us all.